Hello, my name is Philip Tussing. I'm with the faculty of the Department of Economics at Houston Community College, and this is the first of three videos on the sources, theory, and practice of critical thinking. The first video is critical thinking and the scientific method. And as a frame, we're going to look at critical thinking or the scientific method in particular as it's taught in schools. We're then going to look at aspects of the theory behind the scientific method, and then we'll look as it operates in practice, as well as considerations, especially around the social sciences. Okay. This is the scientific method as it's taught in sixth grades, approximately, in American schools. Uh, it progresses through six linear stages uh, from, from the initial question through hypothesis and then experiment uh, to the observations and the analytical aspects and sharing the results. This is not really how science operates in practice. This is a much better idea of how the scientific method operates in practice. It's a collaborative process. It involves a lot of talking to other people and working your way through literature and finding as much information as possible around the topic that you're looking into, and then touching base with people about whether your initial hypotheses around the uh, problem are valid or not. And then you devise experiments that would validate or invalidate the proposal. Uh, you would carry out the experiments and talk to relevant parties about the results, perhaps experiment some more. This slide has to do with a concept that was initially developed in anthropology. It has to do with whether you're on the inside or the outside of a given group and the kind of group think or group perspective or tribal perspective, if you wish, that is developed as part of a given group. And here we see several examples. Uh, one is of Charles Darwin, who is, of course, a Victorian British uh, scientist uh, who who had a particular perspective around the rest of the world and the culture available to people in the rest of the world. And consequently, he viewed people from Africa as being savages. This kind of perspective also applied to Native Americans, uh, not only in the United States, what later became the United States. Well, by that time it was the United States, and in all the rest of the Americas, as well as large swaths of people in Asia uh, and the Pacific areas, etc. So a very substantial proportion of humanity was relegated to being unworthy of considered a civilized people. This is no longer how we approach these matters. But at the time it was standard. And this is what I mean by the concept of insider or outsider at, from the point of view of people in the 21st century. The perspective of Charles Darwin and his colleagues at that time would be completely outside of our scientific framework, but at that time it was well within it. So we need to understand from that that our current scientific framework could easily be superseded by another one at another time, so that when we look at uh, the cultures and the institutions of people who are outside our current framework and have a different way of looking at it, we need to understand that their perspective may or may not be correct, but our perspective also may or may not be correct. Ibn Battuta in China didn't find that country to be a very good place, uh, in large part because it violated his principles of how society should operate. This is applicable in 2024 uh, for Americans looking at the treatment of women in Afghanistan. Whereas, of course, the people who are current rulers of Afghanistan look at the status of women in the United States with some measure of horror. So it's important for us to be able to take ourselves outside of our current perspective and look at things from an outsider's level, in part simply as observers, and to the extent that we need to make judgments around how people uh, operate in their societies, we should judge on the basis of something more closely approximating utilitarianism, utilitarianism being the foundation of the philosophy of economics and of economists generally, in which the 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 social institutions are are considered to be optimal if they result in an optimal economic and social efficiency, and if they lead to the greatest good for the greatest number of the people in that society. So here we are looking at the rules that make sense from our perspective around looking at other social systems or other belief systems, which is number one, that one should respect them. That doesn't always mean that one should agree with or not pass any judgment whatsoever on the considerations of other belief systems, because those belief systems may not adhere to the principles that I was enunciating in utilitarianism of efficiency, as well as the greatest good for the greatest number. If you look at social media, for example, in the United States, social media are often tailored uh, in in order to very specifically outrage people by poking their beliefs and and leading them to suppose that people who have other belief systems are morally wrong. And it's useful to, number one, consider whether the information that one is receiving around those practices by other people is accurate, which it frequently is not, or it may be partial, which is another form of inaccuracy. And also to consider whether the beliefs that one's own group has around what is optimal stands up to those tests of efficiency and of the greatest good for the greatest number.